Our first presenter is our keynote for this evening, and he will speak to set up a broader discussion with our panel. Our keynote speaker is Mr. Bjorn Olthof. He's the Senior Manager Graduate Recruitment for Europe, the Middle East and Africa at Hilton. Bjorn has been a Hiltonia, I should say. I hope I got that pronounced correctly, but has been with Hilton in talent and leadership development for a considerable period of time, and has been also involved in their learning and development, looking after at various points along the way 14 hotels, 5 brands and 2 countries. So clearly back in the day, frequent flyer points would have been pretty terrific. So without further ado, may we all welcome Bjorn to the microphone. Over to you, Bjorn.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me quickly put up a deck for you. Bear with me. Let me know if you can see my screen and can hear me loud and clear. Can you hear me, Paul?
We can see and hear you.
Yes, I can see and hear you. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you for having me tomorrow on. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are. I'm based in the Netherlands, so it's almost 8:15 in the morning. I'm very aware that our colleagues in the UK, it's a very early morning, and for some of you, it might be very late in the evening. I think it was early August when Greg reached out to me. Greg and I used to partner up when he was still Dean of the Stanford University in the Netherlands. And we spoke about all the effects that the COVID virus and pandemic has on the industry, and what actually we as a company were doing about it. I think Greg and I had a very long, tough but interesting conversation about the things that we as a company had to do. And in order he asked me to share with you a story about what our company is doing today when it comes to internships. What are the opportunities for students to do lots of research projects with you? Are you still offering your programs? Do universities need to change their curriculums maybe based on what we're seeing right now? What is the new normal really look like? How will automation and visualization change the scope of field of how you need to educate our people and how you actually take people on board? So we had a very lengthy conversation, and I think in order to set the scene, I would like to take you through a few slides, but I'll do it rather quick because I don't want to steal too much ground of SDR, which will actually be joining with you on Friday. But these were some slides that actually we got from SDR that were presented back to our European general managers to give them a kind of a heads up. And I need to tell you up front, these were the slides that we got just after the first wave was over in Europe. So, for me, for my region right now, it's I'm working now in 69 countries, so it's slightly more. So in the 14 hotels, I've moved up to almost 500 hotels, and we're up to 12 brands as such. But every country, every region has a different focus, has a different status where they currently are. I think when we just got on, I think Russell mentioned that Melbourne will be getting out of the lockdown tonight, which is a fantastic thing, or Paul, you said it, which is fantastic. While here in the Netherlands, we're actually facing most likely the end of this week or sort of next week that we will enter our second lockdown. So country by country, it's a whole lot different about how we are responding to the virus. And what that means for us as an industry. But let me take you slightly through on that side. So, if you look to the overall, summer is over, so what's now? I think that the difference what we ever encountered before is back in 2001 and 2002, because I think in all fairness, everybody still speaks about 9/11 being the final push. But, reality, Q1 in 2001 was already a very bad time. Yes, the final push came after 11/1, and 2002 was a very bad year of a crisis, followed by 2008, a banking crisis, where a lot of challenges were happening. But the big difference for us as an industry was every time there is a crisis happening, the hospitality industry is the first one to suffer, but it's also the first industry to recover. The difference with this crisis that we're in right now is that we're one of the first to suffer, but most likely one of the last to recover. The way it looks like. Plus, a lot of hotels, and that's something we've never encountered in our lives, were forced to close the doors to really push the guests outside, meaning a lot of consequences for our team members. I think luckily what we've seen now over the summer, now the summer is over, The majority of our hotels are open again, are about to open again, which is a very powerful thing. And in countries where particularly, you know, it all started obviously in China, but also in the United States, the vast majority of our hotels are opening again. And so also it seems within Europe, Middle East and Africa, and I think equally within the Asia Pacific region. We also see that China is bouncing back, and China is actually doing a fantastic purpose. And we all look at what they are doing and how is it possible that when it comes to occupancy, they're bouncing back so great. What can we learn from them, what happens in China? And what can we learn, you know, how can we introduce that within other parts of the world, particularly for us in Europe, Middle East and Africa? We also have seen that ADR is recovering in the recent months, which is again, depending on the region that you're in, depending on the country that you're in, it's a big thing, and we're happy with that. But this was all pre to the second wave that hits, particularly Europe, and you will find out that particularly the Middle East and Africa are slightly behind when it comes to the second wave, and hopefully they won't get into the same elements where we're in Europe right now. We're seeing that China recovery looks to set to continue, but particularly we see this happening not so much in the third tier cities, because they're still slightly lagging behind. We see that happening in other cities, and this is a trend we also see happening in countries in Europe, for example, in the UK. We see this happening in continental Europe. We see this happening in Africa as well. And the same thing goes for the RevPAR trending. That actually what we're seeing in the first tier cities, they're slightly below versus last year and the previous years. But then the other cities, the gap is much smaller versus the plans what they have. So what you see typically is that although the big cities are suffering, you see a different kind of guest type traveling. You see, you know, that particularly domestic travel is far more important for certain markets. And that's certainly something we've seen in the UK, something we've seen in other markets as well. But definitely the big box hotels in the major cities are still suffering from this virus. And so, you know, sunsetting in summer has begun, and actually we are on a full second wave in Europe. And experts actually are telling us that it is, they call it a tsunami. And if they look to the multiplier factor, the R factor, about how quickly the number of people, cases are increasing, I think over the last period of time, we've seen all over the news in countries such as the Netherlands, but equally in France and in Germany and the United Kingdom, and Italy and Spain, we see a lot of actually infections going really up, and governments are all deciding differently how to react on this. Countries like Wales is on a full lockdown already. The same actually goes on a more, you know, technical lockdown in the Czech Republic. The Netherlands is on a partial lockdown, and so that's what we've seen in certain regions in the UK, Liverpool, London, happening as well. And that's all, you know, worrying to a certain extent when it comes to our business and how we then need to deal with it from an hotel owner's perspective, occupancy perspective, and equally how this translates back to how we work with our team members across the board. In the UK, the recovery started later, but interesting enough, the recovery on particularly the provincial hotels was a lot stronger than it came to the bigger cities, such as Edinburgh and London in particular. And that's something we really have seen. And we've even seen that during the first wave, the occupancy levels, particularly in the city of London, were significantly lower than it came to the regional UK hotels. And that's an indicator, but we even see the same in Amsterdam versus the regions. We saw the same in Berlin, we saw the same in Prague, we saw the same in Barcelona, in Rome, and all of the major cities. The same kind of trend was really as visible and still is today. So what can we expect after the summer? We know that when it comes to the different booking patterns over the summer, all our hotels have benefited significantly from particularly the leisure market. And with the leisure travelers actually coming to our hotels, that has recovered quite some good bookings and good business for us on the books. But we also know that the business on the books today, after 14 days, drops significantly. And when it comes to particularly the business bookings and the big conventions and the events, those kind of elements are not happening for a number of reasons. Because a lot of people actually can't travel to countries because they are part of a curfew, they might be part of a lockdown, or they actually are forced to get into a quarantine of 10 to 14 days, which actually will push a lot of people back for traveling. And obviously, within our part of the world, that's something which is really significant. If you take, for example, the UK, we are really leaning on, for example, the American and the Asian travelers, which for some reason, obviously, are not traveling to the UK, and that's just an example. So we do see a consistent trend visible. And that's something which is, you know, happening in all of the countries, which is then kind of worrying. So, you know, is it easy to look into 2021? It might be, because the way we responded, and I'll put it here as hotels, was first of all look at where are we with occupancy? What do we need to do? And when we saw that some of our hotels really were forced to close, you obviously had to look to what kind of governmental rules are in place. How does it work with contracting? I think that the first reactions our company did, and that's similar to what other companies did, was looking at, so what are the contractors contracts look like? Do we need to terminate them or can we keep them? What about people with a probation period? How are we going to handle with them? What about people with an ending contract, an indefinite contract? How can we work around that? And also, how do we work with interns? And our philosophy has been that we wanted to safeguard as many team members as possible through this pandemic as we could, supported by governmental schemes as much as we're in there. You will find out that in the Netherlands, for example, the scheme is actually being very supporting and making sure that the businesses are all open. In other countries, that was slightly different. And so having that all in the back of the minds, we then had to look at, so what does it mean in terms of occupancy? If we run a 10% occupancy, what will that mean with your manning? If you're running 15% occupancy, what will that mean with your manning? And our choice has been to make sure that we'll safeguard our team members first. But as a result, it also meant that I had to cancel and terminate all of the internships that we had. We had to rescind offers for people starting in our programs and our graduate development programs. For the one purpose is that we didn't feel it was the right message to send out to the outside world to get people into your hotel with little to no experience, taking over the jobs of people actually who were made redundant at the point of time. That did not really make sense. It didn't feel right for us. And that's why for the very first time in my years of working, the 20 years of work in this industry, we really had to do that, and which was obviously very unfortunate. In the same time, we were approached by a lot of universities say, well, no, we can help you. We can help you with, project groups and tell you about all changing your strategy, what you need to do. And as much as we love working with universities and say, well, that's fantastic if you bring us some fresh ideas. We didn't have the time to really push on that because the way the pandemic was developing, we had to react. We had to change our way of working. And that was done from a corporate perspective, from our leadership team in McLean in the United States, that came down to our regional offices in Watford, in Glasgow, and Dubai, Singapore, and etc., where we learned how to really deal from an organizational perspective with this crisis. And that's something we certainly had never experienced before, where there were far more multipliers and far more people being involved in this. So having to support students, that felt as a contradiction as well. So as a result, again, we pushed back all of the project and research reports because we didn't have the right support for these students at the point of time. A lot of our team members were being put on furlough. I mean, I think that's one of the words I'd never heard of before this crisis. Now the word is in literally every sentence that you see when you read about articles. And I see Russell is nodding. So, the furlough scheme in the UK, comes to an end by the end of this month. We've seen that the furlough scheme, which actually that's where it comes from in the United States, actually came to an end last month. And that's the difference being that in the US, it's embedded in law, in the UK, it's not, in other countries, it's not. And so, this is how do you do with those? What do you do with the amount of work? How you divide it over people? How do you get people back at work as much as you can? What will they do with salaries, for example? Because in a lot of countries, a lot of our team members were affected by pay cuts. And certain parts were then covered by the governments, but other parts were not. And so you really want to make sure that you are doing the right stuff in there. So if one of us would have that glass ball that says, well, this is what the future look like, and this is what you now need to do for the path of recovery, that's great, share it, because that for sure it's the $1 million question you get into this. So 2021 was the year that we all looked forward to and say, well, once the vaccine is here, and everybody has the opportunity to get vaccinated, all will get well. Well, we all know that the medical industry is working very, very hard on getting the vaccines, and we hear different kind of news and different kind of media reporting about this. Fact is, we're not there yet. Fact is that whereas we thought that the end of Q4 would actually be the big recovery, we're still in the unknown. But there are some green shoots, and I think that's good to say. When will business return? I think one of the first things that we got back is business will return when people also need to return to offices. Where we are today is that in the UK, but also in other parts of Europe and outside of Europe, within Europe, Middle East and Africa, a lot of people obviously are working from home still. And you can see this on this graphic very nicely that in the UK, it's predominantly people working from home versus traveling actually outside. And there's a fantastic graphic which is spurred by proximity and reason for traveling in sectors where you can see the early recovery versus the later recovery. But as a business, we're very much leaning on towards our business sector about meetings, events, congresses, where larger groups of people come to your hotels, part of your meeting rooms, and etc., have you over roommate stays, and etc. And that from this graphic is already clearly to show that that will take a while before that really that international travel comes back. Because as an industry, we're also relying heavily on the airline capacity to recover. And again, this came back to you until September this year, but it definitely goes to show that in the airline industry, and you've read the news maybe about Lufthansa, about British Airways, about Emirates, and who decided to really lower their fleet of airplanes, lower the number of flights, because of everything that happens around the world. So we're currently in a very interesting matrix about what happens in the country, what can happen where. And if I take Europe as an example, it's very interesting to find out that in one European country does quite nicely, but then the neighbor countries actually are doing very badly when it comes to the number of infections. So when will this last? When will this be over? I mean, that will be a great question to ask. Will this have definitely an impact on about how we continue working with universities? I think the answer for the time being is yes, but that's obviously afterwards for discussion if ever it's available. Because when it comes to internships, and even though we're looking for internships, for example, starting in February, you know, we don't know for the time being what the month of February might look like. We don't know and to what extent our hotels have all recovered. And actually the business forecasts look very promising to really get people back on. Because our first initial approach will be to make sure that the people who have been, you know, made laid up for one kind of reason, to try to get them back as soon as possible. And then just find out how can we support universities as much as we can. Because we also know that universities and the hospitality industry are you know, like twins, and they can't go without each other, and we need to find a way to support each other. But I guess the way that how we need to support each other needs to change, because what we've seen before is not resonating right now, and none of us have ever experienced a situation where we're in right now, where literally hotels are being closed, airlines actually are keeping their air capacity on the floor, and people are not traveling. And so, you know, that's a huge difference that we've seen in the previous years, but it questions about the different impacts. So, you know, will automation change in? I think what you might have seen in different companies, and Hilton was one of the first ones to lead. We were one of the first companies that had, for example, a digital key, which was a kind of an app you could use from our honors program, or that's our loyalty program for our guests. And the guests could decide to use that honors app and actually go to the room of their choice, which obviously you have to select it online. And they could open the door without touching any of the services as much as they can. They didn't have to pass front desk to leave their notice, depending country by country, because in some countries you still need to leave some credentials behind, but that's a different kind of story. So it often offers, you know, our guests an opportunity to choose. Do I want to see a person front desk and meet that receptionist, or do I actually want to go to my room without seeing a single person? And if I want to check out, do I need to go back to front desk again to check out, or can I actually leave the hotel because all of my details are in that app, and that's working out? We actually had that kind of capacity within our company for quite some time. We've been working on that digitalization as much as we could for a longer period, way pre-COVID, and that's definitely working out. Because the two factors that we've noticed are very crucial today for guests is hygiene and its safety. And that helps of that feeling of hygiene and safety as much as we could. And that's one of the first reactions, obviously, that we want to push back to our customers and to our guests. Will that also mean that we're saving jobs or taking jobs out? The answer is no, because we feel we're still in a people business, people industry. It's a people serving people industry. So by no means this digitalization is taking away jobs within us, but it's changing the landscape. And I think if I take that kind of angle, the way hospitality industry is collaborating with university partners, you know, I think we all need to start to think about what changes can we do to make sure that the students of today will actually are, you know, in the first year, and they can consider themselves to be the lucky ones. They are the ones actually who still have a few years to really get into this kind of cycle before entering the market. And what do they need to have? What kind of skills are relevant to them? What we think is really, really important there is they need to be agile, they need to be flexible. They really need to understand that how a crisis really hits. So potentially, but I'm not the expert here, that I will really push that back to you. It's something that you need to start including in your curriculums as well. And we know that when it comes to accreditation, that might take a while before that really it's embedded into your curriculums and stuff. But I mean, none of us has dealt with this dire situation where we're talking about health and safety being the two most absolute factors of importance for people to travel. And when people are traveling, occupancy goes up and jobs are available, and there we go. So lots of things to consider. Will the tourism and travel industry recover? Our answer is absolutely yes. There's no doubt in our minds that our industry will recover. The question is up and when. And that's something we don't really know from the time being. So I can't really put a timeline on it because they're also different country by country, city by city, and that's really a lot different. So it's very grateful to hear Paul saying that Melbourne is getting out of the lockdown tonight and he's going to run tonight in the rain and has lots of fun out there to really celebrate being out of the lockdown. And I hope that at a point of time, everywhere around the world, this is happening, and it's all kind of recovered. So we must keep the faith. We must keep the faith, but also face the facts of the current reality. And the current reality is, in Europe, for example, is that we are back into a second wave. And that second wave is a different wave than the first wave that we see. And it's a different wave, and it also has different kind of impacts about how we deal with our business. We know the virus is here and it controls the movement of people, which is still a factor. The good thing is we do have business on the books. It's not a lot, but it's gradually improving. I think on the other hand, what we also see is that pre-openings are materializing. So we are opening hotels around the world, which is a very hopeful sight. And that's something we're very proud of. The majority of hotels have reopened, not all, but the majority have reopened. But there's also the don't know factor. We do not know how badly the winter, this second wave will be. We know that we're in there. We know that in some countries, they're speaking about a third wave. Again, we never know how that will materialize. We don't know when that cure will be found and vaccine will be found, and how that will be rolled out, how long it will take before the effects will be there. And we can't possibly imagine what the impact will be for the economies around the different kind of countries that we're really in. What we will expect is China to be the benchmark, and the recovery for the rest is likely to stall without the cure. That's something we'll anticipate on. We also know that the demand for travel has invariably been damaged. It's not invariably damaged, it will change, it will be for the better, but the way people are traveling will be different. All of us are used to now online working and also working from home. It will have an impact on how we actually deal with our businesses. So a lot of conventions might be done on a hybrid status. It's definitely something Hilton is really trialing around the world and making sure that for a lot of companies, it makes an impact for them to still meet people out there. But the fundamental part of the industry about meeting people and building relationships is still there. So that's why we have a strong belief that people will travel and people will get those experiences really out there. When it comes to finances, we think that RevPAR recovery in most markets is likely to be by 2023, 2024, comparable to the 2019 numbers. So that's quite a time ahead. I think the time in between and next to the finances, it's all about how do we as a company, how do we as an industry recover and make sure that our students will get into our hotels and our offices now and the year after and the year after, get a good kind of experience. And they will, when they look back 5 to 10 years from now, say, well, actually, in that pandemic, I was there and this is what I've learned. These are some valuable skills that I really have learned to really be different. So that's in conclusion, Jane and Craig, that I have as a kind of a presentation. Hopefully it opened up a kind of a floor. I can tell you for a fact, it's been an extremely difficult time for us in my team. As a recruitment team, obviously, there's not a lot to recruit. So helping the business out there. And I think that agility of people helping out wherever the business really needs you is really out there. And I'm sure that Russell had a similar kind of story when it comes to what happens in Australia. And I think I need to pass the mic to him. Right, Jane?
I'll hand over to Paul to continue on the session now that the keynote has been done.
Terrific. Thanks, Jane. Bjorn, thank you for that. There's some very thought-provoking, some very challenging, some very confronting ideas that we've got to address here, and there is no shirking it. We've just got to deal with this. So to help us with that discussion, we will roll into our panel. The topic of the panel is the new normal. What will this future look like? Joining Bjorn, two colleagues, Russell Cool, who is the General Manager, Victoria and South Australia from Minor Hotels here in Australia. Russell's been in the industry forever and a day, having worked at Onyx Hospitality Group, Stanford Hotels and Resorts, the Langham Hotels and Resorts, Mirvac and Accor. He's worked in Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong, Adelaide, Melbourne and Sydney in Australia, other parts of Southeast Asia, but most interestingly, Sri Lanka. And Russell was with the Onyx Hospitality Group in Sri Lanka during the Easter Sunday bombings, which was a terrible tragedy a few years ago. And Russell was actively involved in leading the hotel group through the development of new security protocols, as well as the rebuilding of the country and the industry as it recovered from that. So welcome to you, Russell. Joining Russell and Bjorn is Mr. Reno Verikakis, who is the Director of Luxury Sales and Partnerships, New Zealand, Fiji and French Polynesia for Accor Hotels. Reno is highly networked across the Asia Pacific region and has extensive experience and contacts in the MICE, wholesale, corporate, government, e-commerce and trade sectors. So Reno, welcome to you. So gentlemen, if I can kickstart the conversation. So Bjorn's painted a pretty tough view of what's going to happen. But there's still a little bit of uncertainty as to when are we going to squeeze the trigger and when are we going to see things turning around. And I want to invite your thoughts about, do we wait for government and a big green light and an all clear, or is there something that we in the sector, both within education and industry, do to kickstart the process? And Russell, given your experience in Sri Lanka, can I throw to you first, please?
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Paul. Interesting deck from Bjorn. It's you can almost copy or find and replace Europe and put in Australia and New Zealand into those graphs, and the tracking and the way everything's panned out globally. I looked at some graphs not so long ago where they talked about the SARS pandemic and what it did to the global economy. It was very isolated in a lot of respects, but this COVID virus has had almost the same impact in every country, particularly in the hotel industry, and the way you see the graphs trending. To come out the other side, I don't have a crystal ball, but certainly I read all the same commentary that most do, and they look at 2020. Well, if they're saying if there's a virus by July next year, a vaccine, sorry, by July next year, we're likely to see 2022, 23 here in Australia get back to some normality, or at least pre-COVID ADRs and occupancies. But that's all dependent on international borders, domestic borders. Yes, we're hopefully coming out of a full, or we are coming out of a full lockdown tonight in Victoria, but all we need now is the domestic borders to open up. My Sri Lanka days, yes, I managed to navigate my way through the Easter bombings, and then that was a devastating impact on the country. But I think one thing that can correlate across both the pandemic and that is the resilience of the people. And Bjorn talked about keeping staff employed over recruiting graduates into. We did the same there. We're doing the same here. Furlough it's called, but we call it stand down here. So we still have that, but I think I learnt very early on the piece, the most important organisation in any business is government. They do control a lot. So we do need those restrictions to ease before we can start pulling the trigger on employment opportunities and graduate opportunities. But that's not to say that it's not going to happen within a short space of time. We saw what happened after the first, I guess, lockdown here in Australia and New Zealand. We had a fairly decent or steep incline back into the occupancies, albeit rates weren't there, but incline. And then obviously Melbourne went down into a second stage, which impacted on Sydney. So Melbourne and Sydney, being the two biggest markets in this country, have a material impact on the rest of the country. So I think we do need the government to open up those borders, but I think those recovery, certainly in the people space, will be a bit quicker. Whilst we might be the last to come back online, as Bjorn rightly says, I think we are, and he's right in what he says, is we are a people business. We serve people. Technology is a big part of it going forward, but we still are in the people business. So I think over the next 12 months, we'll start to see some numbers coming back into our staffing levels. Maybe not the same level, but certainly coming back.
Terrific. Thank you for that, Russell. I should mention to all of our colleagues that if you've got a question for any of our panelists, just pop it in the Q&A and we'll keep an eye on that, and we will pose that to our panelists. If I can turn to you, Reno. So Russell spoke about this idea that you know, we really can't move until the government gives us clearance, but lag times, how are we going to deal with lag times? And the reason why I raise it is that our state government here in Victoria gave us 24 hours notice. Well, actually it was 30 hours notice. Yesterday afternoon about 3:30, they said the industry can open up at 11:59 tomorrow night. And our newspapers and news lines this afternoon are full of stories of bars and restaurants rapidly restocking and rapidly rehiring staff, and they're absolutely ready to go tomorrow. So can the industry turn on a dime like that?
Oh, I'd like to think that we can, and I think that from a resource perspective of people who we do have employed who may have been furloughed, we do have resources to be able to call on. I think the challenge is going to be how long that stand down period has been, how long people have been, I guess, unable to go to work. And if I can just lay some context around, specifically around New Zealand, whilst our numbers have not been as huge as I guess Europe or Asia or the USA, we've only had less than 2,000 COVID infections here. We currently have only 64 cases that are active with, 64 in managed isolation. For us, tourism is our #1 export market. It's a $41 billion industry, and out of that, 60% of it is domestic. It's incredible that it's, you know, our biggest export industry, you know, almost 21% of our total exports and 10% of our GDP. But as far as, I guess, the employment that it brings to the country, nearly 14.5% of all the people employed in New Zealand are actually within the tourism space. So that's a lot of people. It is also made up of a lot of our international workers. I mean, we have, you know, the amount of people coming into New Zealand for a working holiday is brilliant, and it's great because it brings such a beautiful and diverse conversation and work ethic and skill set, which we all kind of embrace. But likewise, you know, when New Zealand went to lockdown first, we were given, I think, less than 48 hours to kind of reopen when it happened. And if you look at our hotels, you know, our biggest source market into South Island is obviously Auckland. Our hotels were not doing well at all, and they announced they announced that you can fly to Queenstown and Christchurch, and I think my poor reservations teams down there almost had heart attacks because they could not keep up with the bookings. So you've got occupancies of 25-30%, literally going up to 85 and 90. And the challenge with that is how do you know, upsize the hotel to deal with that many guests through food and beverage, through your porters, through your concierge, through, you know, your guest relations team. And what we have found is that no longer, I think, is it important that we have a role. The role should be service. It shouldn't be I'm just a porter or I'm just, you know. And I think where we're seeing, particularly in our hotels, and I'm speaking specifically for New Zealand, because we still have such a strong domestic, I guess, push of revenue, is the fact that, you know, I've got GMs who are carrying bags and who are, you know, trying to make, you know, lattes. Some of them are doing a good job of making coffee, others are not so much. But all of the teams are actually bonding together, and all of the teams who have studied or have been in a particular lane of their vocation have now had to handle, you know, checking in, have to handle, you know, clearing tables if need be, have to handle assisting potentially with night audit. And I think that sometimes I think that's actually quite positive, and it's actually great to be able to see, I guess, people integrating and working with each other and learning new skills. I think the biggest challenge is making sure that we are delivering the service levels that we are supposed to deliver, because regardless of how our rates might change or how the hotels might sit in occupancy, the guest paying that dollar still wants that same level of service regardless. So we have to make sure that we deliver that. And I think the conversations that we have with our teams, that we're all in this together, we are one team, you know, I think has done well for us. We're very proud of our Prime Minister. We wish we'd had sometimes a little bit more notice to get things organised, but I think we can do the best with what we've got.
Terrific, thank you for that. You're proud of your Prime Minister. We think we're jealous of your Prime Minister.
Very, very lucky. Very lucky.
Yeah. There is a lot to be said for a unicameral parliament, a single national government, and a strong leader. So you've hit 3 for 3. I want to pick up on your comment, if I may, Reno, about this idea of flexibility, about moving past employment roles, about skill diversity. You know, you mentioned general managers, hopefully they're carrying the bags and not dropping them, and, you know, just as making good lattes. I appreciate that adversity, you know, can often sort of create that creativity and that sort of open-mindedness. Do you think we'll be able to keep that going into the future?
Look, I think to Bjorn's point earlier, and also to Russell, I think this is going to be with us for some time, and I think that we kind of have to. And I think it's as leaders of organisations and partners with education and universities, and that we do need to keep that front of centre. You know, we look at the moment. So Kiwis can actually fly into certain states of Australia, but when you come back, you have to quarantine in a managed isolation. So we're still seeing you know, freedom one way, but not so much freedom back. So I do think that this cycle, this will still continue. But I do also think that it's given people an opportunity to go back to their basics of why they're in tourism and hospitality. We're there to serve, right? And I think that's, you know, fundamentally what we're there for. And I think it's great to see people still very, very proud to do that. I think also the fact that this will be around for some time will continue to allow us to become creative and collaborate even more.
Thank you for that. Bjorn, would you like to respond to that, particularly the bit about commitment to service?
Sorry, I didn't catch the question. Can you repeat that?
Oh, yeah, yes. So Reno's comment about this idea of our core reason for being here is our commitment to service, irrespective of the particular role or skill set we use. Yeah. So can I ask you to think about that in terms of your remit, particularly with regards to talent management and recruitment?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the difference here is, if I look to the recovery and actually in the upcoming periods, if I divide Hilton then in 3 segments, so we've got a luxury division, we've got our full service division, and our focus service division. And our focus service division are typically the brands like Hampton and Hilton Garden Inn, and that's where, particularly in if you say the lower scale, that will be put wrong, but hopefully that put it in the right context. We see that actually that our general manager already had to really create that cappuccino and work with that around. But interesting, I think the difference is, if you look then to where students often are interested in actually to join the industry, out of my experience, predominantly it's about the luxury segmentation, because for some reason the mindset that seems to be on a high level, in other words. And I think that's fundamentally wrong, because particularly on the focus service levels, that's where you definitely learn how to manage people, how you understand what the business is all about, and how you need to be hands-on. And I think that kind of mentality, if not changed, has to change, or at least people need to understand that that's what the business is all about. My concern is actually what I see with the students now and with their ideas about this, is about how willing are students today to really move back into the hospitality industry. Because if they've seen that this industry is actually has closed down a lot of internships and a lot of training opportunities for them, and they see that other industries such as the retail markets actually have provided them opportunities, why wouldn't you go for an option there? So how do we as an industry on one hand, and how do we as a university partner on the other hand, make sure that our students still have that full appetite to join our industry and actually develop their careers? Because I guess there's you know, if you look to the different industries, hospitality industry, in my perception at least, is one of the industries where people can really accelerate their careers and learn a lot of stuff by being hands-on in a wide variety of departments, and actually become very, you know, multifaceted. And that's one thing they need if they want to have the ambition to become a GM or a leader in any kind of departments. And that's regardless if they work with Accor, if they work with Hilton or with Marriott, or any of the other companies around the world. So I think that's where the other challenges really lies for the time being. But I'm fully with Reno about what really is required there, and it's going to take some time. But I think on the other hand, you know, hopefully this pandemic also gives us some positives, some goods about this, that people need to understand that things have got to change. And you can only be successful when you change along with that mindset. And if you're stuck to the same mindset that you had before, it will definitely backfire on you, and that will be counterproductive for you as a person, but equally as you as a business. So I think that's really essential that people need to take out from this pandemic. The question is how that will look like. I mean, you know, that's something I can't predict for the time being. But I definitely think it's about, you know, that students get a full understanding about what this impact of this pandemic is on the industry, what it is on hotels, and etc., and what they can expect. So it's a lot about meeting expectations and finding the right levels. So, you know, as an industry, we can meet the expectations of students, but vice versa, students have the right expectation by coming to our business. I think it would take it 4 or 5 years ago, 2 years ago, maybe a year ago, when the student would approach me and say, hey, I'd like to join your hotel openings and transitions team because I'd like to be in asset management and development. And that's all great. I mean, at the time, you know, we had those positions available. The question is that still feasible? I mean, we don't know. Or are people only look for corporate roles? For them to really start understanding, you know, if you want to learn what this industry is all about, and Reno's absolutely right. I mean, with the vast majority of people working in this industry, they're working on the floor. They don't work in certain kind of offices. So if you want to really understand what this is all about, you really need to get your hands dirty and actually start from scratch. So maybe this is the reset button that we get to really say, well, the industry, like I said before, it's a people serving people industry. You need to reset. You got to understand what are the fundamental elements of joining this industry, and just find out if this is something that you really like or not.
Terrific, thank you for that. Russell, I notice you're nodding.
Yeah.
So I want to reframe that and pose the question: how do we position recruitment opportunities, particularly for students, in the light of, is it a job with employer? Is it a career in the industry? And you know, do we have to sell both, or can you sell one rather than the other?
Well, yeah, interesting question. I think I just might add quickly. Interesting, Bjorn's comment on I guess the economy sector is how I've known it. My first hotel manager job was with an Ibis hotel, and I would check people in it, you know, or check people out. I'd make the breakfast. I'd go make a bed. I'd change a light bulb. I'd then go do accounts receivable, all in the space of one day, because those models are designed around, you know, having that multidisciplinary roles, and you know, it actually set me up for my career. And I mention it as a career because it just tags onto the question you just posed. Hotels are a career. I mean, if we talk about retail for a second, and you know, retail, okay, yes, someone can serve me, or you know, buy a shirt and things like that. There's only so far you can go in retail, and you might get to a shop manager or something like that. Having never worked in there, by the way. But with hospitality, it's so broad. Hotels are so broad. You get the business acumen around running a hotel or a region or a country or a company is very broad based. You know, you need all those skills, and you start with service, absolutely. But I think the competencies have changed over time. I think, you know, you look at, there's a reason why hotels are expanding the way they do. So put a bit of a reference to that. When I first moved to Shanghai, I opened a hotel in Shanghai in 2010. And I think there was something like 2,500 hotels registered on TripAdvisor. 4 years later, when I left, there was 4,500 hotels. So a significant increase. Now, whether they were, and there was a lot of development along those, but they're assets, they're businesses, they are corporations. So it is a career. And you're not just, and I think that's where people understand, people need to understand that it is a career. And someone told me recently that the janitor at NASA, someone was walking down the hallway and the janitor's mopping the floor. And he said, so can you tell me how your role fits into NASA? He says, I put people in space. Because the culture of that organization recognise that every level of that organisation has a role to play in the success of that organisation. So, and that's the same with hotels. Whether you're carrying a bag, whether you're the general manager carrying a bag or the actual porter carrying the bag, you need to have that competency level, that organisational goal, clear communication, and that's what makes a career, in my view. You know, our competence is important, and then, you know, as we move forward, yes, the competencies are changing. You know, we talk about the digital, the technology. Interesting fact: in 2020, the top 7 companies in the world are tech. So Amazon and Apple have replaced Exxon and GE from 2005. So that says how much technology is playing a part, and that will continue to play a part. So from an education standpoint, it's important that those digital competencies are built in, because, you know, without that, you're just not going to grow and develop, and that's what makes a career. You grow and develop. So I think it's all relevant, and I think we talked about there was a bit of a acknowledgement there about, you know, change, and, you know, I've always said to my team, challenge the status quo, paradigm shifts, disruption, you name all the sound bites you want to, but it does have relevance. And if there's, and I think with someone, I don't know whether it was Reno or Bjorn that mentioned about creativity earlier, that's just as important. Building that into education is very important, and you only have to look at some of the activities, and I think it was Accor actually. Yeah, I think it was the Sofitel Wentworth here in Sydney, or in Sydney, I should say. You know, they're a quarantine hotel, so they had, or isolation hotel, so they had 14-day stays in there, like most around the world. You know, you're going nuts sitting in a hotel room for 14 days, but what they did was put a DJ in the courtyard in the middle of the property, and light show and a DJ, and they created this entertainment. So whoever came up with that should be rewarded, because that is creativity at its best. And I think that's where, and I could go on about all this for many hours, but I think that competency level and having not just the one stream, whether you want to be in the finance or you want to be in the transitions, I think as Bjorn said, go into development. If you have several competencies, it can take you in many different directions all over the world.
Can I add that it's not only the responsibility of universities, it's also the responsibility of the industry. And so one of the examples and that we're doing is partnering up with, for example, Breda University in the Netherlands, where we run a Hilton class. And actually our purpose is there that it already in the second year, third and fourth final year, we actually are welcoming students to join and to meet with our facilities, meet people around. And if they've got questions with their thesis and stuff, where, you know, they can reach out to people within the industry. Because a lot of these universities are applied sciences, and we feel if you want to be part of the applied sciences, and this is our philosophy, our findings, as an industry, you also need to give back. Don't wait until the end when people are graduating and say, hey, we've got a job, this is what you can do. And now we're expecting, oops, there's a gap. How do we close that gap? But it's equally about getting to that discussion between universities and industry partners on the other hand, to see, while that curriculum, and although we're not the ones deciding what that curriculum will look like, or not part of the accreditations and stuff, but definitely when people are being educated for our industry, you know, there's a say about us, what we're doing, and how, you know, how we come together and help each other out. And that's, with it, particularly in this specific example, it's a great way how we partner up and actually come closer to each other. And I think that's something, particularly now where we're in this industry, it's an opportunity that we need to step into and say, well, how do we make sure that the industry understands education and education understands industry? Given that you guys run a 3-5 year accreditation curriculums and stuff, it's something we need to really build in together.
So thanks for that, John. So does that say we need to be changing the curriculum? Do we need to be changing the nature of our internship program? Are there things that we can do? And Russell made reference to notions of creativity. Reno spoke about, you know, being sort of flexible and adept. I mean, are these the sort of skill sets and aptitudes that we need to be developing as part of the more formal aspect, and ensuring that our students and our graduates have those dispositions and orientations rather than just hoping that they get them. I'd like to hear from each of you. So if Reno, can I throw to you first on that one?
Look, I sometimes think about how in my career I've been very fortunate to manage some amazing sales teams, and I think when people have come up to me or people in the hotel or outside the hotel come and say, oh, I want to work in sales and marketing, and my number one question to them is why do you want to work in sales and marketing? And maybe that's my fault, but they think that all we do is have lunches and entertain clients. They sometimes don't see the reality is that to get to sales and marketing, you do need to understand, everything from revenue to sales to marketing to the front of house, how a decision to sell a group or a conference or incentive impacts the entire hotel. Insofar as whether or not it's part of the curriculum, I'm probably not the best to sort of say, but I do think there needs to. I would like to see. I mean, when I went through university, I didn't go to tourism school or hospitality school, but through university, I do think that that's something that could be probably positioned to I guess to students, to let them understand that to be a successful hotelier, you can't just be an amazing revenue person. You've got to understand all facets of the hotel, and I do think that could be possibly something maybe a bit more pushed within the learnings. But and I do want to acknowledge what Russell said earlier, that you see some of our amazing GMs and leaders, they do everything, and by doing everything, it teaches the teams around them that that's what it's about. So yeah, I think moving forward from a curriculum point of view, I think perhaps why not, right? What harm could it do?
Okay, thanks for that, Russell.
Yeah, look, I echo Reno. Actually, I didn't go to a hospitality or tourism school, but certainly being, I started washing dishes in 16, so I had no clue what a hotel and the many facets of that hotel. But without knowing what's actually taught in the schools specifically, certainly having a clear understanding of what each department and how they interrelate to each other. And understand what that means to the business of a hotel, it can only be a benefit to both them and the organisations.
Thanks for that, Bjorn.
Yeah, I mean, I echo those words from Reno and Russell. I think adding to this is what I've noticed when we actually just got into the first lockdowns in Europe, and we were reached out by universities. Let me take the UK as an example, because in the UK, students from undergraduate degrees actually have to go a full year internship as of the third year from July to July back to back. And what we've encountered, and obviously that was really at the beginning of a lot of things happening, a lot of the unknowns were out there. When we were asking universities not to actually start the internship in July, but to really put that back into January, so to take it from 12 months back to 6 months, there was a lot of resistance that we got back. I think, quite rightly, because we didn't know how long it would last. Still, initially when we were in April, May, a lot of noise was around, most likely COVID will be gone by the end of the year. So, that few months won't make a difference. And I guess, time will tell. But I think one of the things universities definitely need to really start embedding into their curriculums is about the unknown changes. So, who says that this is the pandemic? I mean, if you take the Spanish flu, which was more than a century ago, who tells us that the next pandemic will only be in a century time? It can easily be another COVID in a few years' time. And how do we then, as an industry, respond to this? So, don't want to paint it too much of a black and white picture, but it's more about, what is it that necessarily needs to be done in a kind of a modular way that we need to educate our students. And what is expected from the industry, and is that something the industry can work with or not, and vice versa. So like I said, I'd like to really get into that connection between universities and the industry, and say, well, what is it that it's required right now? And I think in the upcoming few years, when we are talking about recovery of COVID-19, that might be different from this year or next year versus in 2 to 5 years coming forward. So that flexibility is really crucial. But equally about, what are the main elements that we need to teach? Why is it that one university says doing a 6-month internship is enough, whereas another university says it needs to be 12 months? Is that something and that's country by country difference. So in my part of the world, we are collaborating with almost 1,000 universities. And I can give you one guarantee, all of them were different, which is great because it separates university from university. But there's a lot of good stuff to be learned amongst universities, how you can be more flexible towards the industry, and from the industry, how they can be more flexible towards the university.
Terrific, thank you for that. Now, we're running a couple of little polls. Jane has posted one on graduate flexibility, which is picking up on a number of the comments that we've just had here. Not for our presenters, but for our delegates in the bleachers, there'll be the little poll that will pop up on your screen. So if I can trouble you to respond to that, we can then bring those results into our discussion. If I may now go back to you, Russell. There's been a couple of questions posed about the virtual world, the online world, the digital world, as being an incredibly important area. Do you see that there's scope for students to specialise in the digital world and do their internships digitally?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I may have mentioned that digital competency earlier. I think having that as part of the curriculum or the scope within that curriculum is very important, because the technology piece is amazing. We look at what we're doing here in Australia. I mean, you can't go into a restaurant without scanning your QR code and putting your details in. I went to a restaurant the other day where I did not have to get off my butt. I sat at the table and I just scanned the QR code on the table. They knew exactly where I was. I paid everything right there and then, and it was easy. I didn't have to go to the bar. We could do that in Queensland, by the way. Sorry about that, Paul. But I think having that digital competency, whatever that looks like, there's tech people out there that, and as I said, I think the 7 largest companies in the world now are tech. So it's clearly an area of development, and it always will be. I think we need to be, we're always looking for differentials and efficiencies. But I think if I could just bring that back full circle, we still are in the people business. The virtual, I've been at home. I've been working from home since the 6th of March. Frankly, I can't wait to go back to the office. And my CEO, even the other day, said that, and he was 100% right, is that efficiency's gone from my level and my roles and my peers, because I can't just walk around the corner to ask a question. I have to pick up the phone, or I have to do a Teams meeting or a WhatsApp and then wait for people and things like that. So there's got to be a balance between that digital side of it and that virtual side of it, and that face-to-face people v people. I think you've got to find that balance.
Just for the record, 6th of March was 230 days ago.
Wow.
Not that I'm counting. Okay. Reno, particularly given that your portfolio is scattered across the Pacific and therefore travel is still challenged, do you see scope in the digital realm?
Absolutely, and if we are obviously, as soon as lockdown happened and we sort of started getting our a feedback to some degree, the amount of virtuoso trade shows, we use virtuoso calls or luxury agency calls or client calls you would do via Zoom were huge. And I'll be honest with you, I think my first couple of Zooms I collapsed it because I had no idea what I was doing, and maybe it's my age, I'm not sure, but the reality is that we still do need to have a level of digital competence. But to Russell's point, most definitely we need to have some face-to-face, and I think people have missed face-to-face. And I think as much as we have guests who, there'll be a portion of guests who, to Bjorn's point earlier, probably want to bypass reception, want to check in by their phone, use their phone to open the door and so forth. We as hoteliers and the teams that run the hotels need to understand that technology and know that technology and be able to deliver through that technology. For our regional areas, technology is still somewhat cumbersome in Fiji and French Polynesia. We do have some challenges there, but look, they're definitely getting better. Sadly for us, out of our 4 properties in French Polynesia, only 1 is currently opened. which is our Moorea property, and in Fiji, our Pullman is closed, and our Sofitel is going to reopen, but it's just all to local. And trying to get the team to train on new technology takes a little bit longer in some of those destinations, because of course some of the technology and the software and the hardware is not as robust, I guess, as New Zealand. But most definitely, I think digital competency is definitely part of the new normal, but without taking it away from that guest experience.
Okay, thank you for that. Jane, do you have some results from our first little questionnaire?
I do indeed. And Bjorn, I'm going to look to you to address this as well. So the first question was based on the continuing challenges in the industry. Is your institution planning to make changes to the internship placement elements within the programs you offer? 63% said yes, and 21% said no, with 16% unsure. Bjorn, if I look to you or get you to comment on this, can you make recommendations of potential changes that they could look to implement?
It's a good one. I think it's echoing what Russell and Reno mentioned before about the digitalization, which is crucial to get in there, and how that element works, changing that into curriculum. In order to make some valid comments about what a curriculum looks like, what needs to be changed, also means that you need to fully get a full understanding what that curriculum looks like, to tell what has to change. But I guess what we'll try to mention here is that it's about understanding that certain changes can be absolute disruptors. How you deal with these kind of disruptors, what that actually means, and break it really down. Whereas COVID-19 is kind of an overarching element. The different elements, how it hits the industry is significant on how you respond to that. So let me give you one example. I think we all know that revenue management was originally came from the airline industry, got into our industry and hospitality industry, and we learned quite a big deal. The elements, the impact of COVID on our hotels and the occupancy and etc. was completely different. So where you had a lot of data telling you initially what's typically over the past years, year over year, business would look like and what you can anticipate, how your budget is being made, that suddenly was completely out. And so our finance people, our revenue people suddenly had to really start thinking from scratch. Say, well, what is it that we're facing? What is it that we need to do? And I guess that kind of skills that you need to really embed in this said, well, if you don't have any information, how do you run a hotel? Based on your finances, based on your revenues, based on your operations, that I think is something you really break down to. I note what I think when I see people getting into, particularly from hotel management schools, coming into our programs, particularly that financial piece and the revenue piece is often missing. They have a clue, but I guess that element is crucial to understand how you really run the business. I think the other part is about how digitalization makes a change. Now, chain by chain, company by company, there are differences there. But I guess, this is also about how in our industry are you treating towards your guests? What is the difference about that guest that actually, as on one hand, is a business traveler, takes his phone, opens his room, doesn't want to see a single person in the industry, and then, decides actually to spend another day, becomes a leisure guest or a pleasure guest, whatever it is. And somebody wants to have that chat with that team member to talk about what are the best places to go in town, where this guest is really staying. So, it's also about how do you deal with your customers and your guests and the different kind of mindsets that these people are in, on different bases that they're in. And one business guest is not the same as the other business guest, one leisure guest is not the same as the other leisure guests. So, there's a lot of things changing in that element and that perspective as well. Now, how will that be resonated back into your curriculums? I think that is, it's a very tough question for me to answer, because again, I don't need to fully understand what the curriculum might look like. But definitely that is something as an industry we're looking for to really get. I think when it comes to the digitalization that you asked before, it's all fair and square when it comes to office-based roles. But we all know when it's front of house, guest-facing roles, it's far more challenging to offer these kind of particularly digital internships. So what is it that you can do different here? How can you really integrate that entire cycle to make sure that that's what the students really grab and understand? And equally, that's what the business really needs. But I think Russell and Reno can step in here and give their thoughts on how it will impact the curriculums.
If I could add to that, Bjorn, I tend to agree. If we look at, I think, if we look at segmentation of our customers, and if you look at even like our loyalty platforms and our core Live Limitless, I think it's letting or showing how we don't want to segment and pigeonhole a particular customer, a particular guest, because to your point, Bjorn, one day it's business, the next day it's leisure. But the same as how guests deal with their, I guess, their status when it comes to hotel. When they're staying for business, you know, we do see some sort of data showing us that when they stay for business, the behavior of, you know, the upgrade or the free drink voucher, whatever it is, from an earning point of view, is very, very different to the burning point of view. So we find that when they're earning, they want to get to the room, they want to make sure that they get recognized as an individual corporate traveler. But then when they're bringing their family, they want to make sure that they do get the upgrade. They want to make sure that the fuss is made over the kids, and there's a little Sofitel sheep in the room, you know. So I think it's teaching or showing that the people business is not just about, you know, this is Mr. Corporate or Mrs. Corporate, this is, you know, family of leisure. It is quite different, and opening our eyes to behavior and identifying behavior that can actually make sure that we give the best experience, but also to make sure that we have a loyal guest coming back.
I think just adding to that, also taking that stream for a second, I think it's not widely understood by maybe some of the rank and file staff of how much digitization goes on in their daily life. You think, you know, Reno was just talking about that loyalty piece and that customer relationship management, or what we refer to as CRM. You know, we spend a hell of a lot of time in the back end. You know, when you go onto a website and you search Hilton or Accor or Minor, you know, we know who you are. We know where you've been. We know what you're looking at. You know, and if you're a business guest, we know that you've gone down this. You're looking at this sort of room type, or if you're a leisure guest, you're looking at that sort of room type. You've gone and looked at the spa, or you've gone and looked at the conference room. We know all this, and then we take that piece and then bolt it onto the front desk when a guest checks into the hotel. And we have little pop-ups throw up on the screen, asking the staff to, you know, ask these guests certain questions to tailor, to ensure that we're capturing as much information as we can to tailor their experience. You know, and some people might think, oh, that data capture in the back end, you know, Big Brother's watching, and they are to a certain extent. But certainly from my point of view, I want that data so I can then, you know, tailor the experience to that guest, especially when you work in the luxury sector. You know, Mr. and Mrs. Corporate, or Mr. and Mrs. Leisure or whatever you want to call it, they want, you know, when they're paying $500 or $600 a night, they want everything perfect. So that's where that digital competence and that, I guess, that tech piece comes into it, from the day to day and the front line. So it's very important that that's clearly understood on what part they play in the overall business around that customer relationship management piece.
Thanks for that, Russell. And in fact, that's a really, really interesting point. And in the Australian circumstance, we've got a lot of noise from our political leaders that in the digital age, students need to learn coding, that, you know, coding will be the career path for everybody. But each of you have not mentioned coding per se, but you've certainly spoken about the idea of harnessing the technology and being strategic about the use of the technology, and exhibiting business acumen and thinking about, how do I turn this information to my advantage? And Reno, particularly given your involvement in sales and the whole revenue space, do you want to offer some thoughts on that?
I think you know, my thoughts have always been that revenue is no longer, it's not just about the room. And we see a lot of our hotels now, you know, providing training in food and beverage revenue management, right? And I think that's, you know, just one step. We have revenue opportunities through, you know, car parks, through minibar, or you know, dry cleaning. I think there has to be, when we look at revenue, it's not a room revenue, and it's total, you know, total RevPAR of the hotel. And I sometimes think that as salespeople, I won't lie, I think we sometimes get stuck, and I'm talking purely as salespeople, we get stuck on that sell, right? We want to make sure that we win the business. We'll have a fight with revenue management. they want $450 and I can't get them that. I can only get them $400. So I think though, as long as there's an understanding of the overall business value, and I think sometimes that doesn't get taught. I don't think, from what I know, it doesn't necessarily get taught, but we do look at it from a day-to-day, you know, this piece of business is bringing us F&B revenue, MICE conference revenue, they're doing pre and post. It's that kind of learning, or that kind of, I guess, understanding of revenue management, which is super important in hotels, I believe. Particularly also in, I mean, within the luxury space, I think some of those, the rates come naturally. It's highly marketed. It's an aspirational brand that people will stay there. I think there's amazing opportunity within some of our mid-scale brands to even make more revenue. If you look at some of our, and I'm thinking Bjorn's probably the same as Russell, some of our mid-scales can make just as much, if not better, profitability than our luxury hotels.
So is it about the business acumen, about the entrepreneurship, about the hard scrabble for a dollar might sound a bit too strong in terms of language, but this idea of, you know, money's tight and we've got to make every sale work for us. And I saw, Russell, you've nodded, so I'll throw to you if I may.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in, and it's amazing what COVID has done, and I had the same experience when I was in Sri Lanka after the bombings. Cash is king, you know. So at the end of the day, you know, I had to really change especially in Sri Lanka, from that experience, because, you know, 90% of Sri Lanka's you know, imports or exports, if you like, is tourism, and the country dried up to nothing. And you know, I had challenges with my revenue management and my sales teams, you know, when we were saying, you know, oh, just look, take this business at, you know, in you know, South Asia, you know, $50 is probably a good rate in some surges, but I said, just take it at $50, and they're like, but it's lower ADR. I'm like, I just need the cash. You know, I need to be able to pay people. I need to be able to pay the bills. You know, it's one thing having a good ADR. It's one thing, and it's another thing not being able to pay the staff. And I think what COVID's done as well is, and you know, we certainly in my organisation here in Australia and New Zealand, we didn't close any hotels here, by the way, and we remained operating the whole way through. But we took some business that we would normally not take, and we took it at rates that would be maybe a third of what we normally expect. But we did that just to get cash through the door, and it's actually changed our mindset from a organisation, a sales organisation, and I'm included in that sales, by the way. It's not them and us. You know, I'm wholly accountable for what goes on. So, you know, it's changed our mindset to say, well, okay, you know, RevPAR is one thing, but total revenue per available room is the most important. So as Reno said, you know, if that car parking is additional, and sometimes, you know, if car parking is $22 in the city and you offer it for $5 to win the business, c'est la vie. You know, it's $5 more per room than you had before. So I think that's what's changed the mindset. And a final point on that is, you know, we talked about development and training. You look at the evolution of a revenue manager. You know, when I first started out, a revenue manager was bolted onto the side of a reservations manager. Now it then became reservations of revenue, and then they became revenue and reservations, and then they dropped reservations and became revenue. Now the directors, and now the vice presidents, and so forth. So that evolution of that revenue management side is a very, very key piece of the business. So understanding what that means from an education standpoint and a development standpoint is paramount to the success of the individuals that are coming through.
Terrific, thank you for that. So Bjorn, in particular, how do you deal with developing that mindset when you've got multiple brands?
Yeah, it's a good question. So what we've actually seen within Hilton, actually due to COVID, we also shifted our regions. So where initially we have our focus service and full service, our franchise market, our own market, our leased market, etc. You know, as a result, we've redefined our markets to the point that focus service and full service are aligned into one. Sorry, luxury and full service are aligned into one. Focus service is a second segmentation, and not one is more important than the other. I think they're all complementing each other. So when it comes to that, there's a few things that we then look at for us. It's first is fair market share. How do we run fair market share into the business, and what does it look like? The other thing has to do with leadership. I'm thinking in particular where we see some differences and where we are tapping into what leadership might be differences about is how do you really lead people through change? And I think the strong leaders have really stand up now and actually came up with all the kind of the creativity that Russell was mentioning about and what Reno was talking about. And that truly makes a difference. The old school kind of leadership styles are completely gone. It can no longer be. I think a year ago, I was actually debating with some of our revenue team, for example, about people being unable to work from home because they had to be in the office. I think if that's one thing that COVID showed is that you can be as productive when working from a home environment. So it's just a simple mindset change that actually make people change and to look at those kind of things. There's a lot of things that we need to look at, but I think one of the things that we've learned, I've certainly learned over the last number of years, and COVID has strengthened that, is it doesn't really matter what kind of segment you're operating in. It's about having the right leadership and the right mentality to put that forward. And that's something we really are pushing forward on. So when it comes to our graduate schemes, that is by far the most important thing that we're emphasizing on. And the rest is technicalities and can be taught as much as it is, because how we run revenue management for a luxury like a Waldorf Astoria or a Conrad, yes, might be significantly different than the way we do this for a DoubleTree or a Hilton or a Hilton Garden Inn as such. But those are all the technicalities that you can teach segment by segment, and then we don't think that's really is too exciting. But it's more about understanding. I think that's what Russell and Reno said as well. It's about understanding that entire data piece, how you translate that into actions that lead into experiences for your guests on one hand, but even more important, maybe getting on the right experiences for your team members, because if they are the ones who are winning over your guests at every different kind of element. So that's where we're focusing on big time.
Okay, thank you for that. We've got a comment in from Antoine Bisson from Torrens. As a revenue management lecturer, I love that all the panelists think that revenue management is the key to hotel business, especially now. Russell just mentioned that total RevPAR might be more important than RevPAR. What do each of you think in terms of GOPAR, gross operating profit per available room? Any of you working with that level of analytics? Russell?
In my Langham days, yes. Being Asian owned, they focus in on, and it was not so much gross profit, but it was profit per square foot. So that's how deep it went in Asia, is that every square foot of the building had to generate some form of profit, and we'd analyze that to the nth degree, especially around the banquet space, because especially my time in Hong Kong, I ran some big banquet spaces, and that was the key to the success of the profitability of the business, because you think of a ballroom that can hold 2,000 or 3,000 people, that's a lot of space, and it takes a lot of cost to build it. So I guess from that profit per square foot was one of the I would say, I think I had nightmares at the end of it, because it was very intense.
Yep.
Thank you. And Reno, I see you're nodding.
Well, I guess I don't know if it's good or bad, but in my current role in regional office, it's not so much as Russell said as before, as being on property, but it does definitely highlight the fact that every conversation we have with potential sales opportunity, it does need to have more than just one person conversing. I do bring in GMs, I do bring in obviously banquet teams, and do bring in revenue, and it is a collaborative approach. And it'd be great to think about gross profit in that sense. But I think the way the world is working at the moment, and to Russell's point, sometimes we just need to think about what we can get in. We also have to be quite conscious of the expectations of owners, and I think that's something that can sometimes play a part in rate setting, or I guess expectation of RevPAR growth.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, Jane, we had a little survey item up earlier. Can you give us a quick update on how that's going?
Absolutely. So the second question was on graduate flexibility, and the panelists all indicating, which they have done again in their answers, that there needs to be increasing flexibility in graduates for employees. So we asked the institutions, are they planning on changing the curriculum to meet the changing needs of the industry? So we had a 79% resounding yes, and this actually doesn't calculate, but so just judge it as you will. 29% unsure, said unsure. So perhaps there was a couple of duplications in responses, I'm not sure, but we all know, if we know basic math, 79 and 29 exceeds 100%. You have covered that question in depth with what the flexibility that's needed with the right leadership, knowing RevPAR, being able to work across all different sectors of the industry. But if you were to give some essential changes that you see need to be implemented within curriculum now for the institution, if you could provide some insight into that. And Russell, I can see your brain ticking right now, so I'm going to throw to you. If you could give our institutions some, some key insight into the changes that need to be implemented now moving forward and into the future, say 2-3 years down the track for the curriculum, what advice would you give?
Jane, I was looking at the space because I was trying to think of a good answer. I think, we talked about flexibility, but agility as well. I think the agility of the individuals to be able to change direction very quickly. Now, I don't know how an education institution puts that into a curriculum, but certainly one thing that COVID has taught us is that, it's breakneck speed, some of the decisions that we've had to make, particularly in my organisation. I'm sure Reno and Bjorn are exactly the same. It's, we've had to make some tough decisions and very quick decisions, and that's, whether that be around business, employment, graduates and so forth. What would advice I give? Look, yeah, honestly, I really don't have any one piece of advice other than to say, just look at everything from a holistic perspective and make sure that it all interrelates to each other, because that's how hotels operate. There's no one department that can operate in isolation to another. So they need to fully have a full appreciation and understanding of what everyone's role is, or department's role is within that organisation or that building, and appreciate that there are issues on their side as well as your side, and bring that comes down to the communication side. And we haven't said much about that, but I'm sure I would hope there's some curriculum around that communication piece. If there's not, that's where I would say it should be.
And Russell, as you mentioned, you didn't actually come through the tourism and hospitality education sector, so you're not well versed in the curriculum, but Bjorn and Reno, you both are. So Russell has touched on looking at holistic perspectives, interrelation, and making sure that there's appreciation across departments. You both came up within the education within tourism and hospitality. Knowing your experiences, COVID, and the information Russell has just given, do you have any advice or essential tips on what you'd like to see changed in the curriculum to equip the graduates on the ground when they do come into industry?
Yeah, I think if you look to the entire situation, did we ever encounter a situation where we had to close hotels? When did we ever encounter a situation? I think, Paul, you mentioned that it's 230 days ago since Russell actually stepped foot in his office. In my team in the UK, there are people being out on furlough for 7 months without work. So, obviously it has an effect on people, how they act, how they think, from an HR perspective, it also means, how do you deal with these people? How do you keep them informed? How do you keep them engaged? How do you keep them with you as much as you can? How do you keep the momentum alive whenever the business picks up and they are allowed to be back into your hotels? And then forget about all the other restrictions out there. What does that mental piece do? And how will that reflect back on your workforce? How you want to be seen as an employer of choice? And I think those things from an HR perspective are really crucial. How, from a leader perspective, are you really opening up business? So I think when you said about, Russell, that you've got 30 hours to hire lots of people, you can hire a lot of people in 30 hours. That won't be a big challenge. I think if I open up a vacancy right now, within a day, you get hundreds of people applying. And that's mainly because a lot of people have lost their jobs in the industry and they're keen to really get back into the industry. but do they really have the right training and support that is required for them to do the job? And can they deliver the service that our guests are expecting, and that our owners are expecting, that our team members are expecting? So it's taking you a longer time. And I think that I don't want to turn our students into psychologists about what they need to learn. And it often doesn't state in books, it doesn't say in the book, do this and then that will happen. I mean, it may say in books, but we all know from the fact that actually, in practical work, that doesn't work like that. But getting an understanding about how change management actually will have an impact on what it will do and how you can work with that people, I think is fundamental. It's definitely something, we have learned a great deal about this. We call it Thrive at Hilton. It's about the whole well-being piece, making sure that people feel comfortable at work, that they feel engaged as much as they can do. And even though we have that in place, this entire situation suddenly threw us at a whole different kind of ball game that we were unprepared for and that we had to deal with day by day and adjust day by day. So I think that piece of agility that Russell was just touching on, not necessarily only from a business perspective, but also how you deal with your people, is very, very important to become a successful person there. And in my perception, the only way you can do that is actually undergo it yourself, be part of it and work with different kind of people. It's a very tough thing to really do this only from a university perspective. So I think one of the things, there's a few things that come to mind. I think it's about, we know that there are fantastic professors out there in the world, and some of them, or a lot of them actually have had the same kind of educational experience or working experience as we have, and then they are very fantastic professors to teach it to the students. But maybe if they had left the business 5 years ago, today's business looks a lot different. So can we invite them back from a kind of a shadow internship, whatever it is, so they can see how the industry is responding? Are they really aligned to this? Those kind of small things you can do to embed that into your curriculum to make sure that at least the latest kind of information and data is actually out there for the students, and they can learn what that's all about, what the impact might be all about. So I mean, there's far more that meets the eye than actually say this is what we need to do, and that if you embed this in your curriculum, it's done. I think it's about the whole mindset about when you close a hotel, what will it do? When you open a hotel, what will happen? When you face a significant change in the industry, such as we're facing right now, what does it mean? What does it mean from the different kind of elements, and how do you deal with that? How ultimately, a hotel needs to have the right RevPAR, you need to have, whatever it's the target GOP, or if it's the target RevPAR, or the EBITDA that we're focusing on, the earnings for interest, taxes, and depreciation and amortization. Ultimately, that is what we're all working for. And how do you reach that can be done through different kind of ways. So huge answer, a long answer, and maybe throwing even more unclarity into the box. But I think this is the situation that we're all in, and that's something we all need to work with. And if we're able to find a way to squeeze that into curriculums, so students can understand this more, what that looks like, typically that practical element is going to be worthwhile.
Excellent, thank you, Bjorn. That was a very detailed answer, as you said. So I took a lot out of that aligning the latest data, especially around case studies for students on how they can open hotels and close hotels quickly, deal with significant change. They must have the soft skills. So they've got to be taught the soft skills, be able to work with change management. Agility is important. Both you and Russell touched on that, and gaining real life experience. Now, I did have one idea for our Business Alliance partners, Russell Partnership Technology, that they could actually create a simulation on crisis management, and perhaps that's a way that could be integrated into the curriculum. But Reno, I'll throw to you. So if you've got any thoughts on this as well from your position?
Look, the last thing I would say, and again, purely from a sales hat talking here, it would be, I think what I have found personally and the team here is how important relationships are. And I think, understanding relationship management, the amount of changes that we have seen, we have had TMCs closed down, we have seen account managers disappear into thin air, consultants, procurement has changed. I think it's important that we understand and identify and teach relationship management. It's not just being, best friends with your procurement person or the travel consultant. It's understanding the full circle of that business and making sure that your relationships are dealt and managed throughout through vertically and horizontally throughout the account. But I think if I was to go back and study again, I would like to see a little bit more of that deep dive into proper, true account management, which a lot of us learn on the job. But I do think that there is a place for it early on, as far as diving deeper into an entire account and getting, I guess, all the key contacts and brick walling an account.
Can I jump, Jane, if I may jump in? Thank you, Reno and Bjorn and Russell, for those comments. I want to flip the question though and ask, if you speak to any academic leader, they'll say the curriculum is full. So if you want us to put more stuff in, we can do that, but something's got to come out. So if you think about the graduates that you're seeing today, is there anything that they've got that they've learnt that perhaps is not adding as much value as these other elements? And if I may, I've made some notes where we've spoken about service orientation, business acumen, digital flexibility, creativity, leadership, emotional agility. We can't develop those skills out of thin air. That's going to take time and effort. So if we're to pack those into the curriculum, what would you be suggesting we take out?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in. I'm not sure I would say take out. I would say refine to make sure that it's still relevant. I think Bjorn touched on it earlier, is that you know, if an industry veteran is left to go and educate our future, perfect, that's excellent. But if they've been gone a little while, maybe it's time to bring them back and see what's happened. And you know, as I said, I talked about the evolution of a revenue, you know, the evolution of sales. You know, I remember I was a food and beverage attendant thinking sales, exactly what Reno said at the start, wining and dining, long lunches. I can honestly say I've never, in the last probably 10 years, I've never seen anyone have a long lunch and a wine and dine. So it's soda water or a Coke and a quick meal, because people just don't have the time now. Or, you know, labour costs have got so expensive they can't afford to be out of the office for 2 or 3 hours. So I think it's just more refinement. You know, we do it in our organisations, we do it in our hotels. You pull everything out, you put it on the table and say, is it still relevant? Is it still active? Does it make sense? And as I said earlier, challenge the status quo. You know, does it still, if it's still there, should it still be there? But I wouldn't suggest deleting anything to make it fit something else in, just more refinement.
Okay, thanks for that. Bjorn?
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I mean, it's, I think if I take the Dutch hotel management schools, I know some of them are on this call, they recently came out of their accreditation, and they recently have, you know, completed their curriculum for the upcoming number of years. So to really tell them these are the things you usually need to check out, it's going to be a tough one, but refinement of the different things. You know, I'm sharing, for example, the office with procurement. If I see as an example that initially our director of procurement for Europe had around 20 hotels, that left up to 150 hotels, which are managed, leased and owned hotels. And then, you know, on top of that, he is actually running about 400 hotels, which actually are non-Hilton branded hotels, but potential owners who could have an Accor, who could have a Marriott hotel as a franchise, decide to do their procurement piece through our systems, right? So that entire field of procurement has completely changed the ball game, and the importance has been completely changed, and how they are, you know, dealing and keeping the relationships with the industries is a lot different. And I guess, you know, what Russell says, they have been refining their business in procurement in this specific example, similar to revenue management over the number of years. So it's more about refining what's in there and making sure that it's connected to the industry, not necessarily changing and really taking things out, because I think the majority of things which already are, or if not all the things that are in the curriculums, are defining one university from the other. Otherwise, all of them will be exactly the same. And I think that will be wrong as well. I think from an industry, we benefit from having partners, different kind of university partners and students who actually went through these studies, because all of these students bring a different kind of you know, surplus into our business. And if having students from one singular kind of education, as much as it might sound, you actually are neglecting the opportunity of having, you know, the opportunity to see a wider perspective. So refinement for me, similar to Russell, is actually the crucial word here.
Yeah, and
Thank
same,
you for that, Reno.
Yeah, and same here. I think the only thing I would, and again, without understanding and understanding clearly the curriculum itself, is any teachings that could also be provided a little bit more to the hotels. If you're looking at service levels, like, I mean, you know, service, serving from the left, clearing from the right, or how to make proper coffee. I think the hotels have ability of doing some of that training, again, without knowing how much that curriculum is that technical. But if there is that, maybe that could be reduced a bit, but definitely more the refinement for sure. I agree. I don't think, without understanding anything, I don't think it'd be any, if we've had it there in the past and it's been working well, maybe it doesn't need to come out, but it could just be refined.
Okay, thank you. That's not the answer I was looking for. I was hoping for something that would be really simple that says, well, just take this out and slot this in. But what I'm hearing is a challenge to us to be really clever and smart and think of ways to add more value to the curriculum, particularly in these areas of the attitudinal stuff, the service orientation, emotional agility, creativity and leadership, without abandoning the sort of key content of service operations, accounting, revenue management, and the rest of it. Yep, okay. Now, I'm mindful of the time, and I've been relaying questions that have been chatted in and Q&A'd in, but does anybody within the audience have a particular question that they would like to ask? And Jane tells me there's a technique where you can raise your hand so that you can actually ask in your own voice. Jane, can I flick to you and have you just step us through what we need to do there?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually can't see it as panelists, but on the bottom of the screen for the attendees, there's a little hand. So if anyone would like to raise their hand, Craig has just mentioned that if people have questions about internships and how they can change it, if they don't plan to change it, what are their thoughts on the comments that the attendees have. Craig, you can certainly jump in at any stage as well if you do want to make comment. But yes, if any attendees want to ask directly questions to Russell and Bjorn, we want to treat this similar to what our normal roundtable workshops are, where you have the opportunity to engage with the panelists.
Maybe I can just jump in then, Jane, since you've mentioned my name while people are preparing to put their hands up, which I'm sure they are. And the two polls are really interesting, and we obviously especially selected those questions because these are key elements. The internships have been massively hit by the current crisis, and long term, maybe the curriculums need to change. I'm really interested in the results that people, overwhelmingly saying, yes, we are going to change the internships. I'd be interested to hear from some people attending. Well, what are you changing? Are you getting rid of them altogether? Are you taking them digitally? Are you shortening them? And if you're making these changes, are they permanent, or do you think, well, we'll just make them for now, and then we'll when things get better, we'll go back to how we were. So in terms of the internship, I'm really keen to hear some sort of input into the changes there. And similarly with the curriculum, people are sort of saying, yes, we are going to make changes to the curriculum. Again, what are those changes that people plan to make? Because for me, we've heard this in terms of from every panelist in terms of students, flexibility and agility is absolute key. But I think that, if anything comes out of this crisis, I think the need for flexibility and agility in terms of the institutions is also sort of been highlighted. Obviously, I know the challenges, and the fact we work on a 3-4 year degree program, changes take years to come through. Maybe that's something that we as academics need to look at. A 4 or 5 year turnaround is just no longer acceptable. So what are we doing to address that? So I'd love to hear some input from the attendees on those sort of issues.
We have Diana that has raised her hand, and just to reassure everyone, I can allow you to talk without you having to switch on your cameras. So that might open up a few more people to put their hands up.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, that's great. Well, hello, everybody. Hope you're all well and safe around the world. I'm here in the Netherlands at the moment and enjoying a bleak day. Just to comment on the internships, we have at NHL Stenden widened the scope. So as to say, we've sort of broadened the possibilities for the students to take other kind of service-related internships that are not directly maybe in the hospitality and tourism industries, but have a relationship to them or are service-oriented in some kind of way. What we also are doing is looking much more towards projects that we do with the industry. So all kinds of questions, innovations, assignments that industry have for us that we can participate together in kind of co-creation, maybe for shorter but also for longer periods of time. We are up and running also to help the industry innovate and cope with the current circumstances. So that is how we have broadened the scope of our internships and sort of helped students to have more possibilities in their internships.
I might just jump in if I may. Interesting, you talk about broadening outside maybe the hotel or tourism industry. I had a young lady ring me just last week, just finished school last year and studying tourism and hospitality management at Griffith University on the Gold Coast. And she was looking for a job. Now, I've got hundreds of staff on stand down and we've made redundancies across the board. So clearly I didn't have a job. But she said, oh, look, I'm just trying to get some experience. I've applied for the likes of Hilton and Marriott and Minor and things like that, and I'm not getting a look in. And I said to her, have you, and for those in the Australian market, they'll be able to, be testament to this, is we have a job, what we call a job seeker allowance, which is a government fund for people looking for a job. However, it's how do I describe it? Probably, Jane, it's very lucrative, right? It's it pays well, pays more than what they would get if they actually went to work. So it's actually narrowed or reduced the amount of people available for the workplace for the likes of little cafes and things like that. So I said to this young lady, have you considered applying to these cafes? And she said, well, I want to get into the hotels. I said, well, okay, go and work in a cafe. You're getting experience, and then get that experience and then go apply into a hotel. But I guess it's a question back to Diana and other institutions. Is there that flexibility under the internship or at least work experience to allow them to go and do those sort of ad hoc roles or non-specific hotel industry roles, but aligned to the hotel game?
Yes, for sure. That is exactly what we would like them to do. So at the moment, there are so little possibilities in the sectors of choice, the branches of choice, that students have to be more flexible, and we encourage them to be that. Being more agile, also we look towards the care industry. So there are a lot of skills and attitude that hospitality professionals or would-be professional students have that can be used in the care industry at the moment. So especially in the Netherlands, probably also in other European countries, a lot of initiatives have been started in which hospitality professionals and students buddy up with people from the care and cure professionals and well, get their internship experience there, which I think is a very, very good initiative, because that is where staff and initiatives are needed at the moment in the care industry, the broader care, not only hospitals, but also all kinds of institutions that work in the care sector.
I guess just following on your wording, Diana, it's for what I would like to say, we call it transferable skills, or I think the US colleagues will call it universal skills. Yeah. This is about, providing people the opportunities to develop their certain skills, and which can be transferred into our industry sooner or later, at least in one day. And I guess if that's something, adding to your curriculum question, Paul, that you had before, maybe that is that part. How do transferable skills actually, how are they embedded into this entire curriculum? Because if they would leave the industry for a year or 2 years and then decide to come back afterwards, what is it? How can they convince the industry actually that they've gained valuable experience, which could be very relevant into our industry?
We've got only a few minutes left, so if you don't mind, I'm actually going to throw now to Bharat, unless anyone had any more to add on that, from Charles Darwin University, and then Scott Richardson. So I'll put Bharat up. Thank you, Diane. That was a fantastic conversation in the meantime. That was brilliant.
Thanks.
Good evening, good morning, wherever you are. I'm Bharat, Head of School of Tourism, Hospitality Service Industries in Charles Darwin. Look, I just want to make a comment. I hope you can hear me. Just want to make a comment on the curriculum itself, and probably there's a question there as well for industry. I think a lot of people spoke about agility and so on and so forth in the curriculum. I think what we are looking at is micro-credentialing of snippets of skills, and also not looking at a full unit that you need to learn. So I guess that's the way you can bring in agility. If the industry can say that because of all these changes, we need X, Y, Z skills when a new graduate comes through, then probably it is possible that quickly universities and as well as state providers can provide those skills, which are snippets of small little skills that they can take with them as their qualification, so to say, added to their qualification, I mean. So if I were to ask the industry currently, with all those changes, what would you look at a graduate when they come for jobs in the very near future? What would be the extra skills that you would be looking for?
Happy to throw mine. Attitude. I mean, skills notwithstanding, the attitude is what gets them in the door and gets them the job, to be honest. Right now, we need someone who's willing to be agile, willing to be flexible, willing to learn, and let's be honest, roll their sleeves up and have a very good work ethic. That's what we're looking for. That's what I'm looking for every time I'm recruiting for someone. I interviewed for a general manager the other day, very limited hotel experience, but gee, she had some business acumen, and I've appointed her. So it's that attitude that's going to get them over the line initially.
I would tend to agree with Russell. I do believe in that, but I also do think in this post-COVID world, or during COVID world, I guess, I think probably a little bit more, a high level of empathy. I would look for empathy, which also probably comes down into attitude, is because everyone is still scared. People are scared of traveling. We want them to travel. We want them to do that, but there is still a slight fear, and we just need to be cognizant that it's no longer, I don't think it's as much transactional in roles anymore, and it needs to have a little bit more, softness to it. But yeah, I think attitude and empathy, I think would be great to see.
Thank you, Bharat, for that. So just to recap, Reno and Russell said agility, flexibility, good work ethic, which is needed in hospitality, as we all know, attitude feeding into empathy. That's fantastic. Now, Scott, I'm going to put you back up. I've noticed you've put your hand down, but I am going to bring you in so you can have a quick talk, and that will be our last one before I hand back to Paul to wrap up for the evening.
Hi, thanks guys. So Scott Richardson here, Executive Dean at Emirates Academy of Hospitality in Dubai. Currently in Sydney in jail doing my 14 days of quarantine. So hope to be up in Brisbane on the weekend, Russell. So hopefully the weather will be nice up there, but that's if they don't lock me down in Queensland again. So look, thanks very much, Russell, Reno and Bjorn. It's been great hearing from you guys. I just wanted to quickly add on to the internship thing. In Dubai, we've been open for tourism since the 1st of July. So hotels started reopening sort of in June and July. So we actually had lots of internship opportunities for our students in the July sort of trimester. The thing is, it's very different to what's happened in the past. Obviously, in a lot of hotels, there's reduced salaries. There's people that are working for, you know, much less than their normal salaries. So our interns had to basically accept internships at no pay. So other things like housing and other stuff was included, but they've virtually all had to accept unpaid internships. And rather than working in food and beverage or in front office, they're actually being all-rounders. So that as the hotels reopen, they'll need staff at the pool, or they'll need staff in the events, or they'll need staff in front office. So they're actually getting to experience lots of different things in the hotel. And one of the things that Russell, you just mentioned, that I counseled a lot of students came to me and said, is this the right time for me to do an internship? And I said, this is the fantastic time for you to do an internship, because what you can learn from this experience during this time with the hotels suffering the way they are is going to be fantastic for you, for that empathy, for that understanding of the different aspects of the hotel. So I've been getting feedback from the students. They're really enjoying the opportunity. Obviously, they would prefer to have a few dollars in the pocket, but you know, at this stage of their careers, it's far more important to get this experience than it is for a few dollars. So we've been pretty lucky that the hotels have been open, tourists have been coming. Over the summer in Dubai, we couldn't get out, so there was lots of staycations. So the hotels have been reasonably busy. So you know, we've been a little bit lucky in Dubai, where we were closed down in April and May, but we've been pretty open since June. So students have been able to have that experience. Thanks, Jane.
Scott. Okay, Paul, we have just gone over. That was fantastic conversation. Great to know that Dubai actually kept going and the staycations were occurring. We're certainly seeing a lot of that in Queensland. We've been very lucky to have few numbers. So tourism and hospitality is actually going quite well here. But we are running over time. So Paul, I will hand back over to you to wrap up the session.
Terrific. Thanks, Jane. Thank you to our questioners, those that wrote in and also that put their hand up and spoke. Thank you very much for your contribution. But more significantly, a very special thank you to our panelists and our keynote speaker, Russell, Reno and Bjorn. Great work, gentlemen. Thank you very, very much for your insights, for your challenging thoughts, your provocative ideas. This evening, we've heard from industry, which is fantastic. Tomorrow evening, we will hear the academic response, where we will have colleagues from National Kaohsiung University of Hospitality and Tourism in Taiwan. And we'll also have Perry Hobson from Sunway University and John Daly from the Swiss Education Group. Sorry, I should have mentioned from National Kaohsiung, we'll have Professor Meijung Sabrina Wang speaking. So I am mindful that we're over time. Under normal circumstances in a face-to-face world, we would have presented you each with a lovely bottle of wine and a slap on the back and then a wander off to the bar for a bit of a drink. Unfortunately, the digital technology doesn't allow us to do that, but we will nonetheless extend our thanks to you for a great session. Thank you, everybody, for your participation and your attendance this evening, and I wish you all well, and hopefully we'll see you back tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock for the next session. Okay, thank you all very much and good night.